So make yourself comfortable. All right. Good afternoon and welcome if you're tuning in now or joining us in the room at Politico's Sustainable Future Week Summit. My name's Douglas Busvine and I'm the Agriculture and Trade Editor at Politico. Well, I'm delighted to welcome Brook Cunningham, the Senior Vice President and Chief Strategy Officer at Corteva Agriscience. And I'd appreciate a little bit of quiet in the room over there. Thank you so much. All right, welcome, Brook.
Thank you.
You've flown in from Singapore today?
Yeah,
I came in
I've
from
been all
Berlin.
around the world over the past couple of weeks, but that's the nature of agriculture.
Right.
We produce food everywhere.
All right. So I think we've got a policy audience with us today, not an investment audience.
Yes.
So maybe a quick introduction of Corteva and how you came to be with the company and your role.
Very happy to do it. So, pleasure to be here today. Thank you again for inviting me. As you mentioned, I am Chief Strategy Officer of Corteva Agriscience, where I have had this role since December of 2022, prior to which I actually worked on Wall Street for 15 years. So I made it a career change because I'm so passionate about the industry that I really wanted to come and sit in a role where I could actually have real, tangible impact every day on how we're growing food around the world. My role now, I sit on our executive leadership team, and I'm responsible for our enterprise corporate strategy, mergers and acquisitions, sustainability strategy, our economic competitive intelligence, and a bunch of other fun things. So it's actually a fantastic job because I'm very passionate about the industry, and it gives me the opportunity to travel around the world, meeting with thousands of farmers to understand the issues that they're dealing with every day, and to be, I think, really proud of the role that Corteva plays in delivering innovation to those farmers.
So can we unpack a little bit the business? I mean, it was spun off from Dow DuPont with a fancy name, but you have got basically two pillars, right? Seed technology and crop protection.
That's right.
How should we think about that? Is it a bundle? Is it a proposition? How do they fit together?
Yeah, no, great question. So Corteva is an agriculture technology company, and maybe I can set the stage a little bit about kind of what agriculture is and the role of innovation for those who are maybe less familiar in the room. Agriculture is a very substantial and critical and growing industry around the world. It comprises the work of 500 million farmers, impacts 2.5 billion livelihoods, and contributes over $4 trillion to global GDP every single year. It's the only industry on Earth that impacts every single person in this room every single day. And with the rise in population growth, in income, in meat consumption, and then also with the impacts of climate change that we're all facing around the world now, the demand for crops continues to grow, and yet it also is becoming harder and harder for farmers to produce those crops in order to meet that demand. And so Corteva, where we fit into the system, is that we are an innovation company. We are a global leader in delivering seed, crop protection, naturally derived biological plant health products, and digital tools into the hands of farmers to enable them to produce more food, more fuel crops as sustainably as possible in the face of, again, these increasing challenges in producing crops around the world because of climate change and other issues.
All right. I mean, one productivity area, an innovation area is genetic technology, gene editing. We in Europe like to regulate this sort of thing, and it would be really interesting to understand some of the issues that are in play. I mean, I think we pay a lot of attention to the idea of intellectual property, you know, where there's an incentive for innovation and is important. I mean, I can kind of guess what you would say to that, but you know, where do we stand on the gene editing debate here with patents, and how heavy or light should the regulation be, you know, if we need to have those productivity gains and those environmental, you know, resilience additions that we're looking for?
There's a lot in that question, so I'll try to take that in two pieces.
Yeah.
So first of all, NGTs, just to give some building blocks for those who are maybe less familiar, new genomic techniques, including things like gene editing, we believe are potentially transformational for our ability to produce food sustainably to meet these increasing challenges that I talked about earlier. And there's a couple things I think that are important for folks to know. First of all, NGTs are not GMO. They are using the native genetics of a plant. No foreign material is being introduced into the plant. So very different technologies. That's point number one. Point number two is that gene editing has the ability to really be a critical tool in a farmer's arsenal to help them combat the increasing challenges of climate change, which include increasing temperatures, rising pest pressures, pest migrations. We have insects and diseases now that are migrating faster, adapting faster. And the ability to use these tools will be critical to keeping pace with that. So plant breeding has been around for almost as long as agriculture's been around. Nothing's new with that. The issue, though, with traditional plant breeding is it can take us 10, 15, 20 years to get a new trait into the hands of farmers to enable them to be able to do more on that land. With NGTs like gene editing, we have the ability to double the pace of delivering genetic gain to a farmer to, again, help them to produce more with less on a faster scale. The third point I'd make before I get to the IP question is that NGTs are also affordable and they are available to everyone. They're not held in I think, a small number of hands. There are companies that are as small as 3 people that Corteva works with and partners with to develop new technologies around gene editing. There's a group called Sanitech Seed in Japan that came out of a university system there that's using Corteva technology to develop a more nutritious tomato, for example. And so it's really important for people to understand that this is a widely available technology. And so when you get to the IP question, you have to think about it in the context that it's not just big companies like Corteva where these regulations and these decisions impact. It's startups, it's universities, it's researchers that have access to this too. So it's interesting that you frame IP like in direct tandem with gene editing because you really can't separate them, and we're thinking about that way as well. And the reality is, when you think about the cost that exists around developing these new technologies, these new tools to get them in the hands of growers, it can cost a company like ours $300 million and take 15 years to deliver a new product into the market. And a lot of that cost comes from the really high levels of testing that we need to satisfy to prove that the technologies are safe when used as directed for growers and safe for people. And that's really important that we be able to do that. But in return for that, you have to have some assurance that you're going to have IP protection on the technology you've developed so you can generate a return ultimately on your investment. And that's not just for companies like ours. Again, that's for startups, that's for universities, that's for everyone. Right. So you really can't decouple it. If we want to have these new technologies, it has to be worthwhile for people to be able to go out and develop them, or they won't, and farmers will be left without tools.
Okay. Great answers. I'm looking at the clock, though, as well. So
keep it going.
Yeah. I mean, I think we've got a policy process, a discussion going on in the European Union. How do you view that? Are you concerned at all about the direction of travel there, or do you think that your interests as a company could be safeguarded?
Well, it's obviously not our place as a company to speculate on what the decisions should be in Europe, but I can tell you what we hope ultimately happens is that there is a recognition that these technologies are a safe and effective way for Europe to produce more food, more nutrient-dense food, and to achieve its objectives around achieving self-sufficiency and reducing the dependence on imports. And so it's not getting those tools into the hands of farmers is really becomes a national security issue. Food security and national security go hand in hand, and so we certainly hope that we see things go the direction that we're leaning toward.
All right. Thank you. Could I move over to the other pillar, crop protection? I mean, we talked a little bit about biologics. What do you see as the potential there? How important is this area, not only for sort of sustainability, but kind of for winning the arms race against those pests?
Yeah.
I mean, where do you see the potential, and how are we getting along there?
Yeah. So biologicals, which very importantly are not chemicals, they are naturally derived products, largely coming from natural materials. They're living organisms that can work along with a plant to help protect it from pests and from disease, to improve the soil health and microbial ecosystem around the plant to help it become stronger and more resilient. It's because of that, and because these new technologies we're devising are working. We have a product called Blue N that's a biostimulant in the UK, where farmers are reporting that after using it one time, they're seeing a 20% increase in yields. It's because of that in regions like Brazil, for example, we're seeing meteoric adoption of biologicals. You know, that's a tropical environment, the pest pressures there and the number of pest generations that come are very high. So they're using it as part of integrated pest management and crop health programs. We expect biologics to be 20 to 25% of the whole crop protection market over the course of the next decade. And we already have, I think, 35% or so of farmers around the world are already using biologics today. So we're hopeful that Europe will get equally excited about this new technology because it's necessary, again, in order to combat climate change and increasing pest and disease pressures.
All right. Well, we're at a particular time and place in the political cycle in Europe, but also in the United States. I thought when we had a first conversation that we might be having RFK Jr. as Agriculture Secretary. He's headed for health, but this question remains the same. You know, are we all going to be going organic now in the US, and also on Donald Trump's trade stance? I mean, do you have concerns around the prospect that we could have another bout of protectionism?
Understandable question. It's certainly too soon for us to speculate what the policies and the directions are that the incoming administration are going to take. But what we can say is that Corteva has been and always will be a farmer-first focused company. And our commitment to advocating for and doing what's right for farmers, not only in the US, but certainly in Europe and all of our farmer customers around the world, is really important. In the event that we do end up in interesting trade situations, it's a dynamic that farmers around the world, and certainly in the United States, are very familiar with. And as always happens, trade patterns shift in response to those. You know, there are a number of very large grain-producing regions around the world, and farmers always figure it out one way or another, but stay tuned. We certainly are. All
right, last question. We like to think broadly at our Sustainable Future Week, not just about agri. You've got a joint venture going on sustainable aviation fuels with BP. Could you just, for our audience here, just give a little rundown on what that's looking to achieve?
Yeah, absolutely. So we announced a couple of weeks ago now an MOU to form a joint venture with BP to provide feedstock oils for sustainable aviation fuel for the EU, where obviously there's a substantial amount of demand with new mandates in Europe starting this January that 2% of fuel coming out of EU airports needs to be sustainable aviation fuel, gradually increasing to about a 70% blend mandate by 2050. And so we're working hard to deliver Corteva technologies and partnering with BP in this instance, but we also have partnerships with Bunge and Chevron in the renewable fuels area, but to deliver new double cropping systems in places around the world where, think about it, that you have a farmer that produces a food crop in the summer and then a fuel crop in the winter using new systems, new technologies, so that we can help deliver on the demand for sustainable aviation fuel that's coming not only out of Europe, but a lot of places around the world, while making sure that we don't simultaneously impact food production. And the only way that we can achieve that is through technologies like what we're doing. It's exciting. It's one of my passion projects.
All right. Well, thank you, Brook, for joining us, and thank you especially for putting on such a good show, considering your travel schedule. we'll wrap it up there. Yeah, interesting times, I think, for Corteva. So a big round of applause, I think. Thank you to Brook for joining us. We just ask you to remain seated for now. In a few minutes, our agriculture reporter, Bartosz Brzezinski, will be moderating a panel discussion named CAP Reform, Where is Europe Headed? Thank you again.